In between the armada of JRPG releases happening this year, I also wanted to make time for arguably the biggest release of 2022 in Elden Ring. Now normally I wouldn't cover a game like this on the channel because I personally don't believe it to be a JRPG. The argument can be made that it is, sure, but I personally don't think it is in the traditional sense or in terms of its style. But it doesn't mean that I don't enjoy Souls-like games. I've played pretty much all of From Software's modern works from Demon Souls onward, except for Bloodborne, since I didn't have a PS4 for a very long time, so I've been keeping an eye on Elden Ring. For me personally, it 100% lived up to the hype. It was everything I wanted. It's not my personal favourite Soulsborne game. I still reserve that for the original Dark Souls and Sekiro slightly after, and probably Bloodborne would be up there as well if I had played that. But Elden Ring is still the quality you would expect from Software, and it's still the unique experience you can really only get from these games. No matter how many games try to copy their formula, From Software are the masters of this particular style. So since it's a game I don't normally cover on the channel, the commentary is going to be very much ad hoc. I've got my notes on my screen and I'm just going to expand on what I've written down, and you guys could just watch some gameplay of me just dicking around in the world when I was pretty much overpowered. I'd done everything that I needed to do, and I was just kind of looking around seeing what I may have missed. So in terms of playtime, it took me about 50 hours to finish this game, so yeah, a lot shorter than other people, but I will be explaining that as we go. But upon finishing it, I found that I wanted more Elden Ring, so I was kind of looking at the weapons that I could unlock from the bosses I had killed, and I found a really cool weapon, and then this is basically what you're seeing now, and I put another 10 hours into it without even realising it. So there you go, 60 hours in total. Pretty much saw everything that I wanted to see in terms of the content, in terms of optional content, optional bosses, all this kind of stuff, which we're going to be talking about. And I will be saying as well that even though I won't be referring to the bosses by name, I will be spoiling their mechanics. So it's very much going to be a late game look from a person who has completed the game, and then obviously giving their thoughts based on the completion of said experience. So if you don't want to hear about the mechanics, if you don't want to hear about the areas or anything like that, then I wouldn't watch this video, okay? Because I will be talking about those as we go through. As for the platform I played on, it was PC. I realise a lot of people were having trouble with the PC ports, and I don't doubt their problems, but I can only speak from my experience. Me personally, I didn't actually have much problems at all. I had one hard crash and a few frame drops here and there when going between areas, but for the most part it was perfect. I'm sure there were issues for some, but in terms of stuttering, in terms of hard crashes, hardly anything like that happened to me. So yeah, I can only say what I experienced. So the first thing we'll talk about is the big draw of Elden Ring, the one that sets it apart from all of its contemporaries in that same umbrella, that being the open world. Now Elden Ring, in terms of its open world, it is a very good open world. It's a great open world, I'd say. In terms of graphics, nothing special, but in terms of its artistic direction and the atmosphere it puts on the player, it's unparalleled. And atmosphere in particular is something that FromSoft games are just adept at. I don't think there's many developers who can create this kind of world that's on the precipice of change or the precipice of a new age better than FromSoft. I mean, you think of, say, Lordran in Dark Souls, you think of Dark Souls 3, you think of Bloodborne. They're so good at that particular aspect of their world building, and it's no different in Elden Ring. I know some reviewers have said that Elden Ring's open world redefines the genre. I personally don't think that at all. It's a good open world, yeah, it's a very good open world, but there's no mechanic in there that makes me think to myself, yeah, this is the next step in open world gaming. Like I say, it's very good, it's interconnected, there's plenty to see, but to say that it redefines the genre, I don't think that's true at all. It redefines the genre in Souls games, but not in open world games, okay? Like I say, plenty to find. You've got mini dungeons, you've got loads of travelling around, loads of secrets around the area. But in terms of stuff like mechanics that interact with the environment, like say Breath of the Wild did, you don't have that, you don't have swimming. You know, I expected as much anyway, because at the end of the day, it is still a Souls-like game, and pretty much no Souls-like game, barring Sekiro, allows you to swim, off the top of my head at least. It's not anything revolutionary, it's just a very good open world. Now, of course, when it comes to open worlds, you have the exploration aspect. Now, This is where I know a lot of people will be sinking a lot of their time into, exploring the world, finding every nook and cranny, going into every mini dungeon, whatever that may be. For me personally, I don't explore for the sake of exploring, I explore for the reward. If I feel that there's a meaningful reward, then I'll go for it. Now that reward could be tangible, it could be like a weapon, it could be armor, or it could be something like a new area, just like the promise of a new area or a great new challenge or something along those lines. The thing is that when I was playing, I always go, at least in terms of the games that I've played, I always go for a simple sword and board strength build. So great sword in one hand and shield in the other. I like having the idea of finding openings, getting a massive hit down, long recovery times, but doing a lot of damage and then kind of moving back. That's the way I play. Very simple and it's very effective. And I found the weapon I was going to use very early on in the game at one of the early game castles. It is an optional area, and it is a reference in of itself, but as soon as I found it, I was like, yep, that's the weapon I'm going to be using. All I needed to do was get the strength requirement, which I did, and I pretty much used that build all the way through, minus one particular area, which I'm going to be talking about later on. But it meant that I didn't really need to go into these dungeons to find weapons. In terms of armor, I would just use the armor after beating the bosses. Like every time you beat one of the main bosses, or the shard bearers in this case, most of their armor sets would become available to buy from your main hub. Armor was never really a problem, and the arts of war that you can get in this game, the kind of things you can put onto your armor and shield and all this kind of stuff, I didn't really need that either, because my weapon already had an art of war, and as far as I could see, there was no way to remove it, so there was no reason to do that. The only thing I would really go into a mini dungeon for would be the summon ashes, but again, the summon ashes that you get very early on in the game, the jellyfish for example, very useful for me. It did everything I needed to do, and then later on in the game I got the Mimic Ashes, and the Mimic Ashes are 100% the most broken summon in the game. You max it out at plus 10, it is ridiculous. It's like having a second you, a second stronger you, and it's, yeah, as soon as you get that, there's really no point in getting any other summon. So at that point, it literally comes down to, do I want to explore because I just want to explore? And most of the time, no, because the mini dungeons are good. Like, in terms of the puzzles and stuff like that, they're pretty cool. Some of them are really frustrating, I will say that. One of them has like this chariot that goes down a slope. I think actually a few of them do, but this particular one annoyed the hell out of me because the actual window to run to get to like these little alcoves as you go down to avoid being hit by it and insta-killed by this chariot were very, very tight. And I just got killed by it so many times, so that was very annoying to me. But most of them were fine. They had unique layouts for the most part, cool puzzles. But the bosses at the very end of them, which is a big draw of Souls-like games for me, I love seeing the bosses in these games. The bosses actually in these dungeons were, in the most part, just enemies you see in the world later on in the game or in the later game areas, and you know, that didn't really do much for me. There were a lot of gank bosses as well. I understand why they're there, because at the end of the day there are a lot of bosses in this game, but yeah, there was pretty much no reason for me to go into these areas. Like, if I saw something in the world, if I saw a cave, if I saw a tower, if I saw a castle, I would go to it. But I wouldn't be going out of my way to find them. So that's probably one reason why my playtime was a lot lower than other people, because I wasn't just going around the world checking for all this stuff. But speaking about optional content, and this is one thing I think that Elden Ring does better than many of its other open world contemporaries, is that it has a lot of secrets, a lot of surprises in this world. I believe only 12 bosses are mandatory in this game, and there are about 83 in total. So it gives you an idea of what you can miss, and some of them are pretty integral to the lore of this game as well. Like, some of the shard bearers are completely optional. You don't need to do them if you don't want to. I don't know why you wouldn't want to do them, because they're great fights in of themselves for the most part, and also they're going to give you a lot of souls so you can progress, so you can get all of the so you can get the level ups and obviously make your progression quite smooth. I will say that as well. The progression outside of the initial part, there is like a roadblock boss immediately off the bat if you don't do any exploring before it. And I think it's basically the game's way of saying, yeah, you're not meant to be here yet, go out and explore and then come back. But for the most part, the progression is very, very smooth. Especially the later game bosses, they give you a huge amount of souls for killing them. The enemies as well, the common enemies give you like 2 to 7k a pop, so you're not really going to be starving for runes or souls, or whatever you want to call them. If I had to say what it reminded me of, it reminded me a lot of Majora's Mask. You know, in Majora's Mask you had the 4 dungeons, but then after that, the rest of it, to get all the heart pieces and all that, completely optional. So a lot of this optional content in Elden Ring is 100% worth it. It really is. Those were the optional things I was looking for, you know, the big bosses, the new areas, all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot there. There's a lot to find. I love the little surprises that you get every now and then. You could be walking around the world and next thing you know, you find yourself in a completely new area and, you know, now you're exploring something completely different, which is huge in of itself. Another thing that Elden Ring does pretty well, for the most part, is in its legacy dungeons. Stuff like the intro in Stormveil Castle. That castle is a legacy dungeon. It's got multiple levels, loads of secrets there. It's a very good opening level, I will say that. People who are veterans of this series, people who aren't veterans are just going to start from scratch, are going to enjoy this, I think. Very good in terms of its level design, which is something that, again, FromSoft are pretty good at most of the time. I will say, personally, that, you know, Stormveil Castle was good, the one after it, or the one that you can go to it afterwards is pretty good. And then they do gradually drop off a little bit in quality. They're still good, but I do think they drop off a little bit in quality as they go. But yeah, legacy dungeons, pretty cool, start off strong and they pretty much maintain that quality for the most part all the way through. Now in terms of combat, it's pretty standard. If you've played, say, Dark Souls 3, it literally feels like they've taken Dark Souls 3 system, put it in, and then put in a few additions, like, say, the Arts of War and stuff like that. It's pretty much the same. There's loads of builds you can make and stuff like that. You know, you've got your mage, you've got your faith builds, you've got your dex builds. But like I say, for the most part, it was mostly the same. They did give you a jump button this time around. Like, in the past, it was a bit awkward to jump. Nowadays, you literally just press the A button and you're going to jump. It makes it easier to do stuff like jump attacks and all this kind of stuff. Nothing much to see there. I mean, it's a formula that I personally like. It's a formula that I think is great in terms of forcing the player to be patient with how they go about taking out large cat encampments and stuff like that and taking out bosses. So I understand that it may feel a bit stale for people who have played it before, but I really like it. The UI as well. This is something else I do want to talk about. The UI is derivative of many of the other Souls games in terms of they are a bit clunky. I will say that, a little bit clunky, but nothing game breaking. Like, for example, the minor issues that stood out to me with the UI. First of all, I wish that there was like a recently added tab. Generally speaking, when I got a new weapon, I want to see it, I want to check out its stats, and I want to check out its description as well, because some of them give you lore into, you know, the world and stuff like that. That's the beauty of lore in these games, is that it's not actually explicitly given to you. You have to kind of piece it together with the item descriptions. And generally speaking, when I got a new item, I would want to look at it and basically piece together the lore and see if it gave me anything new. It tells you what the item is, but it doesn't tell you where it is, so you kind of have to scroll down, and later on in the game you're going to have tons and tons of weapons. Trying to find each one is a bit annoying at times, I will say that, but I wish they had that. Another thing is the horse, or the spectral steed that you have to go around the world in. Mounted combat is a thing in this game. It's okay, and it makes some bosses quite easy, I will say that. The horse can die, and to revive it, you have to use one of your celestial tears, which is like your Estus flasks in this game. For some reason, the game asks you, are you sure you want to bring your horse back? And it also defaults to no as well. Generally speaking, your horse will be dead in the middle of battle, so chances are you're going to be trying to run away from the boss, move the option over to yes, revive the horse, and then get back on it, and chances are by that point you're probably dead already. So I wish that they changed that. The last thing for me is that you can't open the map. You can't open the map when you are in combat, and that's fine. That is fine in a way, but when you're being pursued by a very slow enemy and it's still got aggro on you, it is a bit annoying. I wish that they just allowed you to just open the map whenever you wanted. If you die, then, well, so be it. That's your fault. But yeah, I would have preferred if they just allowed you to open the map whenever you wanted, instead of just having to wait for that aggro to dissipate. But like I say, really minor things, even things like quests, for example, I actually think were better in Elden Ring. They're far less cryptic than they were in the past, quite self-explanatory in terms of where you needed to go. Like the quest line I was following, which led to a particular ending, which I think is the best ending as well, pretty much told you where you needed to go and when you needed to do it, so I don't really have anything bad to say about it in that regard. I mean, I wasn't expecting a quest log, it never is the case in a Souls game, and I don't understand why it would be any different here. That's just part of the charm of these games, so not a problem on that regard. Okay, now we move on to the final point of discussion, that being the bosses. Now, the bosses in a Souls game, whatever you want to say, Sekiro, Bloodborne, whatever you want to say, they are the main draw for me. I love the challenge, I love the atmosphere that comes with them, the lore as well, especially if they're important to the lore, and you know, I just love the sense of achievement that comes from actually taking them down, especially if they're a real challenge. Now, in terms of the quality of bosses, now I've already talked about reskins in the mini dungeons and all that kind of stuff. I personally don't really consider those to be bosses, they're just normal enemies with a health bar on the bottom. They're not bosses as far as I'm concerned. When I'm talking about bosses, I'm talking about the real unique ones, the unique models, the shard bearers, for example, and all this kind of stuff. And for the most part, they are really good. I will say that the further I got into the game, the more I did think that some of them were a bit lazy. There is one mandatory boss in the penultimate dungeon, which is basically a gank boss, and, you know, FromSoft have tried to do this in the past. They've tried to, like, rekindle the Ornstein and Smough fight from the original Dark Souls, and they've never been able to do it. They tried it in Dark Souls 2, they tried it in Sekiro. It just never works, okay? You basically had lightning in a bottle with Ornstein and Smough. To revive it is going to be nigh on impossible. The balance was absolutely perfect in that, the arena was perfect, and they tried to do it again in Elden Ring. What they've managed to do is they've managed to piss off quite a few players with it, because that boss fight, I beat it on my first run, but I can see a lot of people having trouble with it. The thing is that you have two bosses, and it would be no problem because the arena is pretty good. The arena's alright, it can break up the aggro and all that. The problem itself is in the individual bosses themselves. They are ridiculously quick, they have ranged attacks. I can see a lot of people having trouble with that boss. Maybe it's not the case, but I look at it and I think to myself, it felt like lazy design. It really did. I also feel that there were quite a few gimmick bosses as well. I'm very much a person who likes to fight mano a mano, and especially with the Shardbearer bosses, there were a few gimmicks there. They were okay, they were fine. One of them was a homage to something that has existed since Demon Souls, and another one I think was actually a gimmick fight done right. It was quite difficult, so what would happen is that you could actually go to this place beforehand and it would actually give you a boss fight if you go at a different time. But in this particular case, they have like this kind of festival going on. You get a little bit of exposition on the boss itself, and you go down a lift and go onto this huge expanse. It's absolutely massive, and you can see the boss in the distance. And from there, you can kind of like summon all of these different NPCs to help you if you really want to. And you're all kind of like charging up this sand dune to get to him and take him out. I actually really enjoyed that because it's something I've never seen before in one of these games. It's something fresh and unique. I did like it. I really did think it was a cool gimmick. So I'm not saying that the gimmick fights are bad, I'm just saying that I prefer fighting mano a mano. One-on-one, the best swordsman or the best mage, whatever you say, wins. One thing I will say as well, in terms of spectacle, the unique bosses especially, my god, the spectacle is absolutely amazing at times. There's one relatively early on in the game, I think there's also a reskin of it as well, like a stronger variant of it. This particular boss though is quite early on in the game, depending on how much you're exploring. You have to do a little puzzle for it first, and it's a really cool build-up. I love the build-up to it. Then you go to the arena and you see the massive foghorn. You're thinking to yourself, wow, this is going to be huge. Whatever it is, it's absolutely huge. That's already setting that sense of foreboding in your mind. You go into the arena and you see it in the distance and the music starts, and my god, that was one of my favourite bosses in the game. I absolutely love that boss. It's too bad that the boss itself was quite easy, but the actual arena, the music, the design of the boss as well, it felt amazing. It reminded me of the Divine Dragon from Sekiro. You know, that boss as well was not too hard, but it was a boss that was amazing in terms of its spectacle, and I think this was another case where Elden Ring delivered on that aspect as well. And there are so many bosses that deliver on spectacle in this game. They're just really cool things to look at. But that's all well and good, having the spectacle and, you know, having some of the gimmicky bosses, but what about the difficulty? For me personally, Elden Ring is not the most difficult Souls game, but it without doubt has the hardest boss I have seen in a Souls game. Even though I haven't played Bloodborne, so I haven't fought against the likes of Orphan of Kos or Lady Maria or anything like that, I think this particular boss absolutely trumps them. It's ridiculous. I think the general consensus up till the release of Elden Ring was that Ishin from Sekiro was the hardest boss that FromSoft have ever made, or at least that's what the general consensus in the community is. And this boss 100% trumps Ishin. The thing with FromSoft games, and what's so good about them, is that they're very accommodating of whatever build you go for. Whether you are a strength build, a dex build, whatever it is, you can generally see the game through with whatever build you decide to go with. And FromSoft have been adept at that for years, creating bosses that are very difficult, but also very fair. This boss is the only time I have had to physically respec. My sword and board strength build was completely countered by this boss. It had very high damage, very high health, high maneuverability. It basically had what amounted to an insta-kill move if you weren't quick enough to get away. Like, you could dodge it, but it came in 3 waves, and you had to run away from the first one, dodge into the second one, and then dodge in again to avoid the second, plus there was a shockwave at the end. So that was really nasty, that one. I honestly thought that it was undodgeable for a very long time, but you can dodge it, you just gotta be quite aware. And the last thing, the thing that broke the camel's back for me, was that the boss heals. Every time the boss hits you, it heals. Not just a proper hit. If you block it, it will heal as well. So every time I got a smack in, like, that was the point of my build, I would find a window to attack, hit them. You know, I would have a long recovery time, but chances are I'd be able to run away and, you know, rinse and repeat. The problem with this boss is that even though you could stagger this boss, they would recover much quicker than I would recover myself. You know, in terms of the damage I did, it would be healed back. So upon doing this, I pretty much came to the conclusion that with my current build, I could not beat this boss unless I spent ages upon ages, you know, death after death, trying to figure it out. And even then, I felt there was an element of luck there as well, because even if you managed to beat the first phase, there was a second phase that was even harder, where she became more aggressive, she got a few more moves, she had a particular status ailment which was very nasty if it got on you, and she still maintained her speed and everything from the first phase. So I had to respec into a dex strength build with a katana that I found in one of the late game areas. And this particular katana had a weapon, an art of war, which was fairly long range. It was a combo of slashes, it inflicted bleed, and the thing is, with her low poise, with me and the Mimic tier, we were just literally perpetually stun locking her. It was kind of like a cheese strategy more than anything else, and she could break through at times. She could hit you with her own moves, but most of the time you'd be able to outdo her aggression with your own aggression and then get to that second phase, and even then it was still really difficult at times. It felt amazing when the boss was beaten, I will say that. It felt amazing. The sense of achievement you get, even if I did cheese it, the sense of achievement you get is something you only really get from these games. I applaud anyone who was able to beat that boss without a mimic or without any summon to do it by themselves. I applaud anyone who can do that, because for me personally, it is 100% the hardest boss that FromSoft have ever made. Maybe a little bit overtuned in terms of what it does. Maybe if one of the mechanics was removed or nerfed down a little bit, but FromSoft are never going to do that, and I applaud them for that. I applaud them that they don't change anything and they want their players to have a challenge. And, you know, I fully hold my hands up that I had to cheese it, but I still beat it. So that's what matters. And like I say, that is an optional boss. It is also a very important boss in the lore of the series. What I will say as well is that the strength of that particular boss made sense because in the lore of Elden Ring, that boss is one of the strongest characters in the entirety of the universe. So I understand why it was meant to be a challenge, but my goodness, like, FromSoft really did go all out with that one. But yeah, good boss, and wonderful spectacle as well. And that's one reason why I say that those optional bosses are 100% worth it, because they are a challenge. They epitomise the sense of achievement you get when you take down one of these strong bosses. And the areas leading up to them are alright as well, you know, as their own sort of legacy dungeon too. Honestly, in terms of overall bosses, I would say it is one of the easier games on offer, but 100% has the hardest boss in the series, and I've got no qualms in saying that. But there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts on Elden Ring. I hope that my excitement for the game, I hope that how much I enjoyed the game got through to you in, you know, the tone of my voice, because I really did enjoy this game. I absolutely loved it. Very good game. I think it is a good game to start with as well for a new player trying to get into these types of games. It says a lot when after you finish a game you just want to play more of that one game, so speaks to the quality of it. So well done to FromSoft, well done to Elden Ring, fully deserve all of the praise it gets.